Stuff and things.
Stuff and things, all right.
Stuff and things.
I love me some stuff and things.
All right, well, we are currently doing the streaming of the live.
The streaming of the live. Well, good morning. Greetings and salutations. Welcome to the Agora. We are forum to examine the unexamined life, or do whatever the heck we threw together on the drive-in. My name's Garrett. I'm here with my good friends Daniel and Richard. I legally required to say good friends, so just assume we are. We like to call ourselves a place where we talk about all the things you want to but are afraid of, because we believe that the questions of faith, ethics, morality, and society are far too important to be solved through memes on Facebook or celebrity rants on Instagram. So, that being said, how's everybody's Friday going so far?
It's good. It's good.
Mine's going fine.
Man, a few words. Should be fewer.
Right.
Just all right? Hey, we can go sit down in our favorite coffee shop today. Isn't that amazing? We are free, sort of. Free-ish.
Free-ish.
Yes.
Free-ish.
Free-ish it is. So, no, it's quite a glorious day so far. So we are optimistic here in good old Marion County that we have the ability to enter phase one of this grand reopening stage. So we're grateful for that opportunity. We're grateful for the simple blessings we have, and hopefully, if anything comes out of this time of lockdown, the idea would be that we truly appreciate and never take things for granted. Again, the simple things of this life. But I know we as humans are prone to forget and prone to forget our many blessings in times of abundance, unfortunately. So I hope and prayer is that we can actually reverse that trend in all of this, but we'll see. I think it's weird. We had this spirit of unity and hope and common good for about 2 weeks of this before it seems to, at least if you go by the general media reaction, which you probably shouldn't, but if you go by the media and social media reaction, descend into madness and division and finger pointing. So it's unfortunate, but I've discovered if you look beneath the surface level, which is what we try to do here in this forum, again, that's the whole purpose of this, is to realize that truth and complicated issues are far more nuanced than the social media world would want to make it. We recognize there is a lot of good, there is a lot of unity, there is a lot of common spirit and common goal in all of this. And unfortunately, the majority, as is the case throughout history in many situations, is drowned out by the very vocal minority. So,
Or just the unique human aspect to become tribal and becomes about my side versus your side versus. It was really interesting. Just a couple of days ago, a friend of mine got called all sorts of names online and everything else, and it was really interesting because the person who called him these names and stuff, once they got able to talk and stuff, it was very different than just I'm going to call you a name and you're going to agree with it. He sort of backtracked and sort of realized, oh, you're a real human, and what you meant is a little different. And so anytime you get a chance to actually talk with people, I think your perspective, even if you don't agree, it's enriched because you get to understand who they are and where they're coming from. And the core basics, I think, of actual classical tolerance are very much that. That you sit across the table from someone you disagree with, you have a good conversation with them, and even if you don't agree, you can still learn to respect one another, So.
But that takes time and effort and like thought and stuff, man.
It does.
Clicking an up finger or an up thumb or a down thumb on Facebook or YouTube takes no time at all. So come on.
Is there a down thumb on Facebook? YouTube?
Is there
No, I don't think there is.
Thumbs down.
our
No.
social media
No,
expert
that's what the
here.
comment section is.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, the comment section is
In
the
Facebook,
thumbs
you
down.
have a range of emotions that you can express, and then on like YouTube, you can.
I guess there is the anger one, right? There's the anger emoji.
There's a new, yeah, they've added, I don't.
Like added a care emoji also.
A care?
Care emoji, yeah.
Care
You're
more,
not
dude.
on Facebook very much, are you?
No.
It's like a Facebook. it's a emoji with a heart. He's like hugging a heart.
Oh, okay.
Am I the only one who, like 75-80% of those, I'm confused of what they are? They're sort of androgynous. I'm like, and I'm worried of sending it because I'm worried that if I don't understand what it is and somebody does, I'm going to insult them.
Well, I think, yeah, anytime you do written communication, there's always a chance that something's going to get confused. if you send a winky face to someone, that could be multiple different ideas about what you mean by a winky face.
Exactly.
You could be like, haha, I'm being funny, or it could also be like, ah. I mean, there's lots of nuance there.
Imagine that language is more complicated than reducing it to a simple smiley face or winky face. Although it was good enough for the first forms of written communication, I guess. I'm glad we don't have hieroglyphics as a main source of communication anymore. But they have their time and place. Okay, so before we get into our format of the day and examine our first world problem, cliche, viral exam, and question of the week, which for you science nerds out there will scratch you right where you itch, I have a question for you all. And I want to know, so this is a situation that came up the other day. I want to know if I'm being pretentious and unrealistic in my expectations, or if I should be terrified for the lack of common knowledge in society. So, oh, thank you, by the way. Oh, and it's gone.
It's okay.
Sorry. You gotta have the right ambiance in here, or else we can't think properly. Work your magic, Daniel. All right. Well, while he's making things appear on a screen, I want to ask you guys a question. So, we were at Auburn Elementary the other day. Our sons love to go and get the school lunches there. It's a way to get them out of the house. It's an adventure. We'll pick up usually some activities for them to do as well. So it's a good fun time each day around lunchtime we head down there. A couple days ago, I was picking them up, and I was waiting in line. I heard this gentleman, probably in his 40s, maybe mid 40s, talking to a lady about the same age about his trip to Amsterdam, and he was talking about the beauty of the city and all the amazing things to do there. My wife is Dutch, by the way, so I'll give a shout out to the fine people of Holland. And he was telling the story and talking about traveling throughout all Europe. And then this lady, again, probably about the same age, next to him says, "Oh, that's wonderful. And then you can just hop on the train to Scotland and Ireland, right?" And he paused for a minute. I could tell the wheels are turning in his head. He didn't want to say it in an insulting way. He's like, "Well, actually, those are islands, and you can't just take the train to them." And she had this realization there. So I wanted to say something so bad. Granted, I am an unhealthy geography nerd. I fully admit it. There's a point where I can name all the world capitals when I was about 16.
Yeah, that's excessive.
It is, yes. No, I don't learn any useful skills. I learn useless ones. It's my finest art form. But my question is it a reasonable expectation to know that a grown American adult should remember the fact that Great Britain and Ireland are islands separate from continental Europe, or am I being snobbish in my expectations of people's geographical prowess?
You are definitely being snobbish. Because
Definitely.
let me tell you why. You are
Okay.
interpreting and making an assumption of their knowledge from your own perspective, which would probably be considered an ethnocentric thing, and you're wrong and you're a terrible, horrible person for that.
Sorry, I'll go into my room and think
Well,
about what I
it
did.
would be.
I'm just
it would be
kidding. I don't know.
interesting-
That was
well,
just a
I
dumb-
think you'd have to do some more digging. Did the person were they just nervous and trying sometimes you're talking to someone and you're just trying to build rapport, right? Connection points, something you have in common, and so you're throwing something out there, but you're not really thinking. You're just trying to And so it could be one of those things. It would be interesting to know that they just said something and they're like, "Oh wait, what am I doing? I didn't think about that." I
They
think
seem
that's happened.
genuinely surprised. They seem relaxed and engaged, excited to hear about their trip, and they seem genuinely surprised.
Or they just generally don't have an understanding of what Europe looks like.
Well, I'm not saying you should know every single geographical point. I view it as there are basic tenets that you should know.
Well, yeah.
And I know "should" is a relative term, and I'm putting an expectation. As a functioning adult, I feel as though
You
and this
know
might be
what's
if I'm wrong,
interesting
I feel
though?
as though that's something
You know what's
should be aware of.
interesting? I think to use this as a bigger context point.
Please do. Jump off from there.
Well, I just think it says something about is it okay not to know something? And I think when we talk about wanting to dialogue, sometimes people in dialogue are learning. And I think there's this sense, even in our culture, where it's if you didn't know something, then it's like a gotcha moment.
Yeah.
And gotcha moments don't produce lifelong learners. They actually, it turns on your fight or flight. It's like, "Oh, well, you didn't know that. You are so."
So then you have to pull out a fact they didn't know just to prove.
Yeah, I think gently helping someone understand like a geography thing. So I think this even gets down to how we treat people. What does it mean when we encounter someone who maybe doesn't know something? And if it's based on the comment sections of Facebook,
Yeah.
it's I'm gonna roast you or call you names or tell you how horrible you are, versus being like, oh, I guess that's okay. You didn't know they were islands, but they are. They're in the northwestern part of Europe. There's a long history there.
I will admit, if they did have a train to Scotland and to
Right.
Ireland, that would be radical.
They would be
So I feel
digging
like
very deep under the ocean.
what
Well, there is the channel, to be fair.
There is.
So you can't.
what that leads to though is the idea that, or I think what it stems from is that we've kind of elevated your intelligence as far as it's like on par with like how good of a person you can be, or like your level, your status, your
Because no one wants to be called intolerant or narrow-minded
or dumb,
Yeah.
right? Nobody wants to be stupid because like it's somehow you're a better person if you're intelligent, right? So
Correct.
think about if you put two people in a room and one of them's a small business owner and one of them's like Mike Tyson, or not Mike Tyson. That's not what I'm talking about. He's like a athlete.
He is,
I didn't
yeah.
realize there's people in that
that's okay.
picture. Okay.
Daniels are into sports
Stephen
and-
Hawking or Neil deGrasse Tyson. That's the
Yeah,
Yeah,
yeah.
yeah.
astrophysicist, right? Okay, so like you instinctively know like who's the better person. Not like really, but you know like, oh, I know who I'm going to listen to. I know who has status,
There's also the
right?
I remember having a discussion with one of my
It is
professors.
Neil
at
deGrasse
Willamette.
Tyson, right?
DeGrasse, yeah.
Neil deGrasse Tyson.
DeGrasse.
Yes.
DeGrasse.
I remember having a conversation with one of my professors at Willamette, and I was quoting some research, and he said, "Well, who's it by?" And I said, "It's a PhD level scholar." And he was like, "Well, just because you have a PhD doesn't mean anything." And I was like,
Does that apply to you?
"Well, I don't know."
Like
But yeah,
him,
he
the
would
professor?
cite 20 PhDs.
Well, but his point was that lots of people can get accolades. That doesn't mean that
true.
the thoughts that you have, and this is what's really hard. So much of argumentation is by authority. I mean, so much of how we argue or talk about things is argumentation based on authority.
Right. It's an appeal to authority
Yeah, I'll
fallacy.
give you an example. I really respect Stephen Hawking. I think he's brilliant, but I think his one of his last books where he argues that because there
The
is
grand design.
yeah, just because there's gravity, there has to be a universe. I think it's a bad argument. Doesn't mean
It's
he's
Mr.
dumb. It does. I just
Jumping
think
the point
it's
or
it's a
something
bad
like that.
argument, and not because.
Well, that means you think Stephen Hawking's dumb then,
No, I just think. He's
right?
wrong
Isn't that
on
how media works today?
And this is key. Sometimes you can be brilliant in one area, and not in another.
Well,
And so we
intelligence
just-
is not like a
We all have
all-around
to be
thing.
careful of that. But I also think like it would be interesting. This is where sometimes humility comes in. Where if you're gonna have conversations, sometimes you have to be open to the idea that you could be wrong. You can have a bad idea, and you can learn and grow from it. And I think that's one of the things I always try to have a caveat is. I always reserve the right to change my mind. I always reserve the right to be like, I used to think this way. Now I think differently because of these reasons. And we don't celebrate that at all in our culture.
No.
We look down on that.
Well,
As a
right, because
flip-flopper.
you're a flip-flopper, you don't have any conviction, right? Like being presented with new material or information and then changing your mind is like, oh, so you must not have been smart enough in the very beginning to have made the correct decision, right? Like that's how everything with COVID's going down. Like, oh, all these assumptions were wrong when we didn't know, and so now we shouldn't listen to them because the science was bad and the predictions were wrong. Like, no, we had no information, and then we changed our perspective and our actions when we got new. It's just
used to
that's
discredit-
science,
yeah,
right?
yeah,
That's how you do science. I actually was I telling you guys? I think it was Stephanie. It's like, what annoys me about people sometimes is how they think that like, oh, this science was wrong, so we shouldn't listen to it. When it's like 95% of science is proving yourself wrong. You come up with a falsifiable idea and you test it and you try to disprove it, right? The whole
We know
point.
It's not this,
We know it's not that.
We don't know exactly what it
We
is, know
eliminate
it's not
the
this.
things that are false
Right.
by process. It's a scientific method. So yes, of course it's wrong. That's the point. We're trying to figure out what's wrong, and science is all like wrong a lot. And then when we figure out where we're wrong, we're like, okay, let's not do that anymore, and we move on to the next thing.
Well, as Thomas Edison famously said, after many hundreds of attempts to create a functioning light bulb, he said, I learned 100 different ways not to make a light bulb. I didn't fail. I learned 100 ways that it doesn't work. If you have that approach, it's interesting though. You mentioned you're quoting a PhD scholar and relating this to the age of COVID in which we live. That the assumption that just because you have a title is correct does not mean you are automatically right on a particular subject. But in our society today, throughout history, and even today, when you're bombarded with so much information, there is a degree to which you say, I can't possibly look through every single thing every single person says. So I have to have some sort of prism to filter that through. And if
Right.
person A, who's a PhD level virologist who's been studying viruses for 50 years, spent their entire life dedicated to it, says this, and high school dropout working in a gas station living in his mom's basement who set up a blog on
Don't
the Everyman
you be
blog.
careful,
I'm sorry.
like how you tread from here.
Sorry, you're not living in your mom's basement. That was only 95% an accurate description. I'm kidding.
I'm just joking. Don't continue. I
Alright,
want to hear what you have to say. No,
Yeah,
I
so
think I
wait,
know where you're
but-
going.
Which one are you going to trust?
I know where you're going.
Does that automatically mean that the virologist is correct? No, but if you have a limited amount of time, a limited amount of resources to process every single bit of information, you're forced to say, okay, by default, based on what I have available, I'm going to default to the fact that the virologist knows more about what they're talking about. The problem with that is
They also might know that, but then that brings in the whole dichotomy of values, which is maybe the virologist says, like, never leave your house and you'll never
Yes.
get a virus.
he can stay. Well, that's the thing.
And then you're
too.
like, well, wait a minute, but throughout all of life, like, there's a balancing act
There
of
is.
information, which is why it gets complex and you have to talk about it and you have to balance out certain kinds of information. But yeah, it is a
That's
prism
true.
that you have to, look through.
Yes. Well, and back to my original illustration, there's no moral value really or life virtue to whether or not you know that Ireland is an island. I mean, I guess you're planning a road trip there. But there is moral virtue to how should we act in light of COVID-19? Should we leave our house? It's not just this is what the virus does. There's an element of should we leave our house or not? What is a greater moral value? How should we apply
Well,
this?
I wasn't really going there. What I was going to say is this:
It's
is how
a
we deal with
example.
people's not knowing things, and
Yes.
as long as we live in a gotcha culture, I don't know that it's helpful, and I don't know that it helps people grow or learn new things or be able to dialogue. And one of the greatest things I think I learned from studying Plato, not that I agreed with everything Plato said, but that he felt the greatest way to good knowledge, or as Aristotle was quoted as saying, we don't know actually if he actually said it, but the life unexamined is the life not worth living.
Oh, Socrates.
Socrates.
Or
yes.
Socrates.
But
for my boys.
technically Aristotle wrote it because he's the only one who wrote about
That's true.
Socrates. So it's the question of who. Anyway, blah blah blah.
Yeah.
But the
It was
key,
said, it's good.
right? I mean, that's why I said it's.
By some
I
dead
attribute it
guy.
to Aristotle because he's the one who
It
wrote
was
it.
said.
The key is how do you treat people who maybe get some information wrong, and I think that's the real key is like how do you treat someone? Like how do you help someone come to new knowledge and say, oh, well, have you heard of this? And that's a life dedicated to learning and to teaching and to
Yeah.
growing, not one of saying we have all the answers and we've figured everything out. As we're about to, dive into this question, we're not the first people to talk about it, so
Well, the idea is
we won't be the last.
I hope not, to dive into questions that matter.
Yeah.
Because there are certain questions, there is certain information that has a much greater bearing on how we are to live in light of that information than others.
Right.
Knowing which movie won the Academy Award for Best Sound Effects Editing in 1999 has little to no bearing on the way I live my daily life. Knowing why the universe came into being and what its ultimate purpose is does and should, although what's sad is that people often reflect more on what the latest celebrity Instagram influencer is wearing than on questions such as the origins of the universe and the origins of morality and purpose, if there is such.
So that's an interesting assumption. Why does it matter?
Well, if the foundation of everything is A, then it will produce certain results. If the foundation is B, it will produce certain results that we should aspire to. I mean, and that I guess that presupposes there
The question
is
of
an
what is a human, I think, is greatly
Absolutely.
like. I'm not sure if this is a valid reason, so careful with this, but I believe it was Aristotle or Plato who talked about beauty is
In the eye of the beholder?
Well, we can talk about why a statue looks a way it does. What are its attributes? What are its physical attributes? But the beauty is sort of an aesthetic. It's like almost an intangible, right? Beauty is something that you see, but you don't quite know how to pin it down, but you know it when you see it.
Right.
And
But you can't come up with a mathematical equation that says 10
this
plus
is
2
beautiful,
equals beauty. Yeah.
right? You're looking at a sunset. It's beautiful, but why? So the question, you know, um, what started the universe, I think, is related to what does it mean to be a human, and is there a spiritual dynamic there? Is there something more than that, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera? I don't know if we're quite ready to jump in, but I was actually going to talk about how this argument goes all the way back to Greece.
Of course.
Of course, and I would love to start with that. So let's keep
Philosophy
going, and then we'll
gyros.
get to how this
All right,
relates to Greece.
last time we
I find it
realized-
offensive that you take pride in your Greek heritage. I'm just,
I'm not responsible for my Greek heritage. To quote Lady Gaga, I was born this way.
Well, hey, they gave us philosophy, democracy, and John Stamos. So there's that.
also a hodgepodge of English words.
That's true. I will say
I wish that was a Greek word.
I didn't really-
Hodgepodge.
Many words for love.
Yeah, I didn't really have a full appreciation for the complexity of the English language until I took Greek, and I say, oh, that's why we do what we do. All right, so we realized last week we spent about 90% of our time leading up to the question of the day, and then had very little time to actually dissect it. So we do want to fast track this a little bit today to get to the main parts of our argument, as opposed to all these shenanigans, hijinks, and hilarity. And once again, if you're listening live or watching us on our YouTube stream, thank you for joining us today. You can comment. Is there a place where they can actually comment live?
Yeah.
Mr. Wizard here. Okay. So feel free to fire at us. You can comment on our.
There's this comment section on the YouTube page.
What he said, and we will do our best to read them. If you have questions, thoughts, if you want to have a topic you'd like
You
us
guys
to
will read
examine,
them. I'm not reading them.
yeah, he ain't doing a dang thing. If there's thoughts you'd like to share, questions, comments, or things you'd like us to discuss, feel free. We love to engage. We don't want this to be a monologue where we just sit and in an echo chamber reinforce our own beliefs. So we're looking forward to engaging with you as we go. But we do want to have a little bit of fun today and build towards our grand question. So I want to start out with one of our favorite segments, one of our 4 favorite segments, because we only have 4. The first world problem of the day. So last week, our first world problem, in light of, again, present times, was when your Zoom meeting drops suddenly or freezes. Today, this actually happened to me a couple weeks ago, and I lamented upon it briefly before questioning again the luxury that I have of lamenting on this problem. That's when Google Maps fails to recognize the road is out, either closed or has not gone all the way through. Have you guys ever encountered this situation?
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
Like
there was a road barrier, and it told me to turn into it. And
Yeah.
I
Just
literally
trust
was
the
like,
machine.
so I had to
Or
go all the way
detours.
around, and I was like trying to
Road
figure out how
closures.
to tell it that it was there. It's like I wish there was a thing that I could just be like, look, there's a giant road barrier
Take a
there.
picture.
I wish there was like a way to report it.
I feel like there was a long time ago, like there was an option like this road doesn't exist or something anymore.
Right.
But
Yeah, it was just the other day there was a huge road barrier, and it tried to take me through it, and I was like, not gonna happen.
I was once meeting with somebody about half my age, and I actually pulled out a road map and was going over like, we used to have to unfold these on the road.
You know what's interesting though? I will tell you this: if it's between Google Maps or Apple Maps, I mean, and this has been a while, but I will pick Google Maps every time. I
Yeah.
think Google's far more
I've
accurate.
literally never used Apple Maps in my life.
Yeah, well, consider yourself lucky. One time, Apple Maps tried to take me onto a closed freeway entrance. Like it had been closed
Oh.
for years. It had barricades and all sorts of stuff
They stay up to
in
date.
the city of Seattle. And I was like trying to turn left, and then there's all these barricades.
Just trust the machine; it knows.
Mm-hmm.
One time, it had me try to traverse the Bridge of Doom, actually, and cross the Wizard's Lair. So I started to question it after that.
wait, what?
Sorry. It
So
wasn't
my
really a
question
bridge,
is,
it was more of a
so
causeway of doom.
so we have like Teslas
You know, for
and stuff
someone
like
who
that.
doesn't pay attention to any like space stuff or any sci-fi stuff, you sure reference it quite often.
Oh, there's nothing.
For someone who's never seen Star Wars and like you
That is
reference it.
not true. I never sat down and watched a Star Wars movie from beginning
Right.
to end.
I
My
just love
brother-
it. I love it when he makes everyone mad by getting Star
it's
Wars
the
and
best.
and Dumbledore and Harry Potter and all of that stuff
When
all
Picard
mixed up.
had to team up with Dumbledore
Yeah,
to return
there
the
we go.
ring to Endor, that was the best ever.
Right.
I'm telling you, man.
It's good. Should write a book on that.
It's just a button that you can't stop pushing. All right, so we all can agree that having the ability to talk into a machine and it tells us where to go with 99.9% accuracy.
I think the best example of that is in the Office series when Michael and Dwight are in the car.
Yes.
And he has one of those new, like at that time it was just the dash mounted one. But he's
Yeah.
like, it's telling me to go right. And he's like, no, Michael, it means veer to the right up here. And he's like, no, it's telling me to go right. It can't be wrong. And then he just turns and he drives right into to the lake.
Yeah.
I need to catch up on that.
It's one of
You
the
know-
best Office moments ever.
I actually remember that show. I missed out on The Office a lot because I was in seminary at the time and I did not have a TV for a year. So I became more of a Parks and Recer. I know people say you like Parks and Rec, you like The Office.
I've almost watched all of Parks and Rec.
Parks and Rec is good.
It's quality.
It's
I
good.
feel like I'm some weird mixture of Ron Swanson and April Ludgate at different moments in time.
Well, yeah, I can see that. Do you like working with wood?
I do.
Yeah, and you do.
I'm
grow
rebuilding a
these
chicken
staff.
coop.
So there's that. So yay for technology, although it's imperfect. Okay. So our cliche of the day, as we've mentioned many times, we'll mention this every single week. We believe that again, truth and matters of truth are too important to be boiled down to memes or Facebook rants or their predecessor, the age-old cliche. Not that cliches are untrue, but that they are insufficient in many cases to grasp the full reality of something. So last week we talked about what was ours last week? We're all in this together. That's right, and how it's technically true but insufficient given the gravity and the diversity of situations we're in.
Yeah.
Today, another one, again, relating this to just stuff I've heard during the stage of COVID, that people have said with good intentions, and that has an element of truth, but can be misguided when applied in certain ways. And that's people who say, in regards to a response to the pandemic, they say, we will never regret doing too much. We'll regret not doing enough. The idea that, okay, if we end up locking everything down, it turns out it's not as bad as we thought, and, it didn't end up being that bad, we can just kind of laugh at this, but it saves lives. They say we won't regret doing too much, but if we don't lock down everything and we don't take it seriously enough and way more people die than necessary, we will regret doing too little. That's the premise of the argument. And I've heard that in many forms from different people. And while there's the old adage again, the older cliche, maybe predecessor, this is better safe than sorry.
There it is.
And I would say true, but it has its boundaries, limitations. Again, at what point is the cure? What point is doing too much actually causing more trouble and actually causing more human suffering? If you believe there is a good, it is detracting from the good more than not doing enough. I mean, it has to be a sliding scale. I think we can agree that a complete worldwide economic collapse is, in many ways, worse than a certain amount of, and this isn't to minimize human life in any capacity, far from it. Those of you who know us, you know that's not what we're trying to get at, but at some point you do have to weigh the realities of the human
Man,
life.
so you're using this as a way to just jump right into the should we open or
No,
close?
okay, I'm just saying, okay, take it out of this comedic context. I'm saying that in any situation, the old, well, you never regret doing too much argument
Well, okay,
has its boundaries and
Hold on.
limitations.
Every cliche has its limits. So a cliche, like for example, if you were trying to start a business and you were like, "I'll regret doing too little," that could probably be true. That could probably be true because maybe you needed to do more so that your business would be more successful, or putting in your best effort, or I didn't put in my best effort in college, or whatever. If you're trying to lose weight and exercise and you didn't put in your best effort, maybe you feel like, I would never regret trying to do too much. I think cliches can take little maxims of truth and they can help apply them to our lives in specific instances. I don't know if it's always the case. Does the person who gets up early, are they always do they always get the worm? maybe. Maybe sometimes people just have good connections, and it didn't matter how early they got up. There's
Or maybe the
more to
earlier
it than
you
that.
get up,
That's
the earlier children get up.
that's
and
why I
then
say it's a maximum of truth. You know,
never regret doing too much. I don't know. I feel like that's flawed in so many
but
levels.
if you were like,
Better safe than sorry. Like, yeah, I guess
you
that
were
kind of
like
works. But
out partying out of your mind, and then you end up drinking too much and getting a DUI, then you might be like, oh, I did regret doing too much. So
Once the consequences become worse than the reward.
there's always a way, yeah. So there are maxims of truth that I think can be applied in certain situations.
I think maybe the idea that this is referring more to the cliche better safe than sorry works a little bit more, because that one, I think that one is widespread. Most people just like, oh yeah, well, better safe than sorry. So like err on the side of caution, right? But then when you apply it to certain things, you have to be like, well, safe for who, for how many people, for what purpose, to what end, right? So safe from one particular thing is one thing, but then there's also safe from a host, a myriad, if you will, of secondary issues that will come about because of an action taken, right? And so I think that's the dichotomy that we're stuck in, and that, like, yes, we want to protect people from this specific thing, but it seems like a lot of people are wanting to only think about that specific thing and are ignorant of, or not aware of, perhaps is a better way to, of the host of secondary comorbidities, I guess you could say, things that will occur because of a loss of a job or a layoff or things of that nature. And so but those are things that are already not really talked about a whole bunch, right?
And
So it's already under the radar.
Right.
I don't really fault people for not thinking about it, because if you're not in that situation,
the whole discussion though has been framed as either you hate old people and want them to die. I've literally seen people say that online, or
Thinning out the Social Security ranks is one I've heard. They're like, that was one of the original conspiracies, is that it's to eliminate the olds or small
or you are
terrible.
and
Pretty terrible,
yeah,
there is a middle ground of learning to balance. You know, I would, from the data I've seen, there is a very large increase of suicides right now.
The calls to
I can't remember where I read it,
Prevention Network are through the roof.
and I should have written it down. But one of the states has seen, the amount of suicides they get in a year in the last 4 weeks. I mean, there are other factors that take, so that it's a little more complicated than just, you want to reopen or not reopen. It's
or you value the economy more than human life, or
right.
yes.
But it was interesting. I got a phone call. I took a survey, something to do with the tax in Oregon, about whether we should tax beer and alcohol more. And it was really interesting the way the questions were framed. You could see that each question was trying to pull on a different heartstring to get what you cared about. And at
You
one
think
point,
children should have
they don't
access
ask
to
you
it?
to tell you what they think. They just want you to answer the question, which I think is like,
Do you want to open the economy, or do you want to save lives of old people?
right. It's like, then that was kind of how it was presented. Do you want to increase, do you want to increase taxes on
Or do you
beer and
want children
alcohol?
to be stupid
Or
because
do
you
you
don't
want
fund this
people who are all suffering from alcoholism to have no recourse? And that was the way it was framed. And it was sort of like,
Wait, what? Yeah,
and-
exactly.
And so I kept interjecting, telling the guy, like, if you increase taxes and all these people go out of business, there could be the opposite effect, that those people now are going to be really, really disenfranchised with life. And they might become alcoholics because they're depressed or something else. I also offered the fact that if we value local economies, we would want Oregon to have a competitive tax rate, so that we would encourage local breweries to be successful against national conglomerates such as Budweiser, etc. Because they're not going to go away if all the breweries in Oregon fail. They're just going to become the substitute.
That's an interesting topic that you bring up, though, about like surveys and stuff, because I got surveyed about like my health insurance, and I had some really weird questions. But the guy, I tried to like clarify when he asked a question, and he'd be like, "It's just a yes or no answer." And I'm like,
Like, it's
Well,
not.
da 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 da. So yes? No, 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 no. I don't.
Right.
That's not. This isn't how you.
Yes with caveats or no with
Just
caveats.
say no. Yeah.
But luckily, they
Well,
gave me a gradient. I could either totally agree, somewhat not agree, or or not agree at all. So it was at least a little. It was some gradients there.
That
you're
was a good.
saying life is slightly more complicated than just yes or no answers.
Yes.
Ha, I got you there. So I think again we can agree that there are boundaries and limitations to this. I think that
So let me ask this question: have you guys ever had? I mean, since we're on this maxim, I think it's really important. It, have you ever had a moment where you were like, "Man, I regret not doing enough"? Then I think everybody's had
Oh
one of
yeah,
those.
yeah.
Yeah,
I mean, we
probably.
haven't had catastrophic consequences like life threatening, but there's a time you're like, I wish I'd done more. I
Well,
wish
I think maybe it's
I'd
thinking
taken that
about
step.
like hindsight. You
Well,
know,
yeah.
it's like, are you going to regret not doing this later, and is that your reason for doing it now?
It reminds me of a terrible show, but guilt. In my younger, stupider days, I used to watch South Park, and there's a superhero on an episode called Captain Hindsight, where his superpower is incredible hindsight. So when something bad happened, his ability was he could come and tell you what you should have done differently to have prevented it.
Right.
And it's
And
like,
that's
thank you, Captain Hindsight. But you're right. When you have hindsight is 2020, you can say, oh, we should have done. Well, it's like there are so many million variables. So, for example, there was yesterday. I guess there was a black bear loose in a neighborhood in Gresham, and one single bear in
What?
one day. Yeah, it like broke Twitter apparently because there's a bear that's just wandering around,
How did I
running for
not
your
hear
life.
about this?
Yeah. Anyway, I think it was in Gresham. So if I were to go to the citizens of Gresham today and say, if you give me $1 million a year, I will black bear proof your entire house, and I guarantee you will never have another black bear problem. They say, well,
the
we can't do too
statistical
much.
likelihood that I would ever encounter a black bear near my house is almost nil.
And that's get to my point. But they say, well, better safe than sorry. Wouldn't want to, wouldn't want to take that chance of a black bear getting in. But you're right. You have to look at the data.
I have an invisible bridge to sell you.
Trust me, it's there. That one.
Culpability.
I have a bridge in Brooklyn, actually, that I could sell you.
Oh, mine's invisible. Mine's better. Buy
But
mine.
mine, you can
You'll never see mine. Needs no repairs.
Is it like the Emperor's New Bridge?
You can step on mine.
Something maybe close to that.
You can only be light.
All yours for $1 million. All yours for
Somebody
$1
shut the
million.
lights out on us. Okay, we get it. Sorry. We'll get on with the topic. Okay. So moving along.
The door.
Because we do want to give sufficient time here to our ultimate question of the day, question of the week. Really, you could say maybe the question on which everything else is founded, because it's the question of foundation of the universe. Before we dive in there, I want to look at the viral example because these do tie in together. This is one that I saw for the first time on Facebook making the rounds maybe about a year ago, and it's popped up again in light of recent events. So many of you might have seen this. It's a meme that at the top the question is what refutes science, and the answer is better science. Then below the question is what doesn't refute science. The answers are your religion, your beliefs, your experiences, your opinions on Facebook. The subtle message is science explains everything, just trust it. And if science says this, then that's the case. And again, we're not trying to refute the idea of the scientific principle. As a person of faith, they often pit the two against each other. And I always say one of the reasons I believe personally, when you look at the history of science, that we believe science is even possible rests on the idea that the universe is rationally intelligible, which is we'll get on to our question of the day here. I believe is only sufficiently grounded in the idea that there is an intelligence behind the universe, i.e. an intelligent being. We'll dive into that in just a minute here. So we're all pro-science, but we have to recognize that science is not as simple as A plus B equals C.
That's math.
What's it? Math is well, technically mathematics is the only thing you can prove because mathematical principles are true regardless of whether the physical universe is real. 2 plus 2 still equals 4, even if there is no material in existence.
Yes, but mathematics cannot inherently prove itself to be true.
That's true. You have to presuppose something, which we'll get to here. You have to ground yourself in something you cannot empirically prove. You cannot use reason to prove reason. You have to presuppose that reason is real. So I just want to get your thoughts on this. Is it, while again not technically untrue, does it grasp the full complexity of the issue? The fact that
Well-
only science refutes science, nothing else refutes science.
So there's a couple ways to look at this. Like, I'd slice up the pie, is what I would do.
What pie are we having? Is it cream?
Well, no.
fruit, cherry?
There's a way in which science is used
I
as a
want pie right now.
tool to create hierarchy of what's considered fact and what's not considered fact.
Yeah.
For example, in the same way, maybe the church in past has said things like, well, this is true because we say it's true. Science can be used in that way.
Absolutely.
So when
Scientism.
and so that's the question is, true science, I think, is just left up to scientists fighting it out and seeing which idea prevails. You know, I don't know if you've ever looked into, I'm going to give away the history of cosmology. The guy who predicted the
dive
Big
right in.
Bang, he was opposed by one of the most brilliant steady-state theorists. The problem is that the science didn't pan out for him. It was clear that there was redshift and that stars were moving away from each other.
Talking about Hubble,
No, it was actually before that.
Windows.
I'll get their names wrong. This is why I need to have my computer in front of me so I can.
You can get it.
I will.
Literally good.
But the key is that in the public sphere, if you were to let those two people argue it out, people just would have picked sides and said, well, this is the person that we think is right.
Yeah.
But that's not science. Science
could
has
use
to
the
be
other
between
computer
the
and you could put
people
it on the
who need to
screen
argue
behind
it out. And so I think that's key, is it between the people who need to argue it out. So there's science as it relates to how we come to culturally values of what is true and what is not true.
Yeah.
And then I think there's the science of there's different gradients of science. There's the soft sciences versus the hard sciences.
Yeah.
Okay, hard sciences are hard sciences because I believe that they can be falsified. I'm not convinced that social sciences can be totally falsified. So I think there's this gray zone of, are they really science or not? And part of this has to do with, if you go back and study history, why does everything, like theology, all these different things, psychology, the idea was that we could apply science to every area, facet of life and get the
Yeah.
same result. I'm not entirely sure you can.
You can apply the scientific principle, testifiable, verifiable, falsifiable.
Yeah, I mean, it
to
doesn't
every
mean you can
aspect.
never do it. Just I don't know that you can apply it to every area of
Well,
life
such as
and get
ethics.
the same result. Yeah, lots of other places as well. So, just looking at this, what refutes science? I mean, better science. I would say that that's true if what we mean by that is like the most, like, let scientists fight it out amongst themselves, and that means you have to let scientists who have dissenting opinions, because that's how we got the guy who believed that the universe was expanding, which I'll look up here in a second. His opinion was not the popular one, but it became the popular one as the facts began to bear it out.
Because it implies
The
universe had to have
predictions
a
he
beginning.
made, well, I don't even know if it was that. Just the predictions he was making were saying the universe is expanding. There were testable models that he was able to put in place that show that that's a better explanation than the steady state theory.
Mm-hmm.
And so, I think you got to let scientists be scientists and let them argue it out, and we'll get to better knowledge that way.
Well, I think one of the other implications of this, which I would take issue with in the scientific principles, is that there is this notion from those generally in the naturalistic community that want to say that the science, the process of science is completely unbiased. You just look at the facts and speak for them. There is no predisposition, there's no bias, there's no cultural bias, there's no preconceived bias. But yet when you look at, but if that were true, again, there would be a much greater degree of cohesion and unanimity within the scientific community. I mean, look at the climate change debate, for example. And again, we're not here to say which side you should take, but I think we can all agree that there are very well-meaning, intelligent individuals who come to some radically different conclusions on the exact nature of it. And some who have stated clearly, this is true, so we should do this because of this. So they're making a value statement. You cannot divorce your value statements from the way that you interpret data. But what frustrates me is when those in the naturalistic community, because I want to separate the scientific community from the naturalistic community, they're certainly not the same thing. When they present to the fact that say we are unbiased, we are simply looking at the evidence with unbiased eyes and taking it for what it is. I would make the case that there is no such thing. There is no such thing as tabula rasa. There is no blank slate. Every single thing we approach in life, we come with certain predispositions, groundings, as they've been called, and to a degree, they influence, they filter the way that we observe data.
Right. It's Fred Hoyle.
Okay.
Yeah.
Not Freddie.
And George Garnall. So Fred Hoyle was the proponent for steady state theory.
Okay. So I would say that's one of my big issues is the idea that, so for example, the people of faith often get accused of believing what you want to believe to be true and allowing that to interpret your data. You want there to be a supreme being. You want there to be a life after death. So you try to look at this information and filter through that lens in order to get to the conclusion you want to be true. And in some degrees, in some ways, that's unfortunately been the case. I've heard people make the argument that we should believe God exists because it makes the world a better place. You should believe it because it gives life purpose. I'm like, that's great. That doesn't make God exist, all right? I could say I want to believe that this calcium deposit on my shoulder, which hurts every day, isn't really there because it'd be better if it wasn't there. That doesn't change the fact that it is there. As we'll get into here in a little bit, I don't think you should make the case that there is an intelligent mind behind the universe because it makes it a better place. I think there's evidence for it. My point, and I'll wrap up with this, is that those in the naturalist community, and I've seen this firsthand, will do the same thing. Yet they'll often accuse us of allowing our biases to affect the data. Go for it.
Well, so first of all, this is a really old question. So if you go back to...
What, refutes science?
No. I think the question of the week, which I think we just need to jump right into, because we've
What
already
is the best explanation for the universe? So that this ties us into the scientific angle.
And so
ties us into our
let
question.
me...
Why is there a universe rather than nothing?
Yeah, why is there a universe rather than nothing?
I'll let you make your opening monologue.
So the basic thought is, first of all, this isn't a new discussion. This is one that's been going on for a long time. So Aristotle was a steady state person. He believed that the universe was just infinitely old. And then there were others like Plato who believed in a demiurge that sort of formed the universe. Maybe not necessarily the creator of it, but formed it, brought it into being.
It came about as the result of some other...
There were the atomists who believed that in Greek philosophy, believed that the world was nothing but swirling atoms. This is where we get the idea of atoms from. And so this debate is not new. It's not one that's going to go away, and I don't know it's one that we can ever definitively know.
I thought that's why we're here, is to solve it.
So here's the problem, and I think this is a really key thing when we're talking about this. If science limits itself to what can be known inside the universe, then whatever happened to cause the universe, if there is such a cause, is itself outside of the universe. Therefore, it could never be known to. So I wanna say that I think the best way to think about this is this: those who are inside the universe cannot see what's outside of it. Whether you're a Christian, a Muslim, or an atheist, doesn't matter. So whatever your speculation is about what caused the universe, we're all making faith claims because they're metaphysical claims.
Right.
They're claims that are outside the scope of what I believe science can do. So if you say there is no God, I believe you're in the same camp as those who say there is a God. Now, everyone's going to go crazy and say, oh, no, that's not true, and we believe in science. But understand what I'm saying. The question about what happened outside the universe or caused it to come into being is a metaphysical question. It's outside the scope of what science can answer. And so we're all in the same boat. We all have our limited ability to see out there. So we can stack up the information inside the universe in such a way to come to a conclusion, but we aren't outside the universe to see what that actual conclusion leads to. There's no way to see that. It's bound by the laws and the limitations of being inside of a universe. So what does that mean? That means the long-standing tradition of people arguing over, when is faith and when is reason, I think is irrelevant, because I think they're all models of saying something that we can't ultimately know. They're outside the scope. So what does that mean? So I want you to think about the history of, actually, let's just start here. The long-standing history of what science has done in this equation. So Jewish people, Christians, and Muslims have all maintained that the universe has a beginning. There's a big, long history of information about that. We could go into the Kalam cosmological argument that Muslim scholars used math to come up with. But at the end of the day, the question comes down to, I think it's something really simple. Why is there something rather than nothing?
Yeah. It would make more sense for there to be nothing given what we know
Well,
about.
here's all I would say. It seems to me that the most that we can know about the universe is this. If the thing, if the universe had no cause, you wonder what is it that would make a universe. Okay, it seems absurd to say that nothing could do something. Is this another way to put it really succinctly?
Unless you try to redefine nothing, which Lawrence
Krauss
has been
tries
one.
to do.
But even that, a quantum vacuum is not nothing. That's
Correct.
another discussion.
Correct. I also believe that Stephen Hawking's a very smart guy. I mean, no disrespect to him. His argumentation about the reason there's a universe is because there's a law of gravity.
That's not nothing
Any logical movement towards something contained within the universe, which in the singularity does not exist. Gravity does not exist in the singularity. Can itself not be the answer for why there is a singularity?
Well,
that's not a good thought.
And briefly to Hawking's point, I'll let you continue. But I think it's also important to recognize that, and John Lennox said this very well in his review of the book, that laws don't create anything.
Correct.
Laws are that which we simply use to describe processes that normally happen in a material universe. Gravity doesn't have a will. Law of gravity doesn't do anything. Gravity is what we use to describe the relationship of force between objects.
Well, the gravity doesn't differentiate between dropping a baby or a rock.
Exactly.
It just does what it does.
It has no will. It simply is. And without material, gravity only exists in a universe with material.
Yeah. So, this is a long-standing question. And so I think at the beginning of any of these discussions, because I don't disagree with the Big Bang. I think the Big Bang accurately describes the history of the universe as we know it right now and as the data shows. The interesting thing is that the Hebraic faith tradition has maintained that the universe has a beginning. And what's interesting is up until the 1960s, we didn't have the evidence to show that was the case.
We had some people who speculated on it,
right?
Like Hubble and
a lot of the people who strongly disagreed early on, it was basically between those who said the universe had a beginning and those who just believed it was ancient or had been there forever. And what's interesting is that science has now shown or given us the best evidence as of to date that the universe does, in fact, have some sort of beginning. Now,
based on its expansion.
Based on the expansion, based on the point that you can get back to some point in which time, the point of the singularity is this. All known laws and mathematical formulas completely break down at that point. They no longer apply. They don't exist. Gravity doesn't exist. There's no strong or weak force, nuclear force. There's no electromagnetic force, none of that. All that's gone. So it seems difficult to me to revert back to this idea that anything inside of the universe could be the cause of the universe. Because whatever that cause is, it seems did not exist at the point of a singularity. So it seems more reasonable and rational to believe that something, I don't know what that's, well, we all have speculations. We could all argue and disagree. And I think this is the limit of where we could be. That something, it is better or more rational to say that something made the universe or caused it to come into being rather than nothing. I think that, to me, seems pretty clear. People may disagree with that. If you do disagree with it, you can let us know. But this is not something that I've just started reading about. I've thought about this for a long time. Now, that does not prove that God exists. What it says is that it seems to be more reasonable that whatever created the universe is itself a something.
Yeah.
It's different than the universe itself. It's not the universe itself, it's something other than it. And, if you go and say, well, there's billions and billions and trillions and trillions and trillions of universes, you only push the problem back
Yeah.
because there always has to be the thing that starts
What
everything.
set it in motion?
Right.
Yeah.
And so I think that's really key
So then-
in my thought in this.
If you concede that point, you could take that though, and you could say, okay, so the universe started, and you think that some sort of entity or force did it. Where did that force come from?
Well, and that's
Where did God come from?
Richard Dawkins' argument. Well, isn't who created God?
I don't know. So maybe there's more to it than we could know. But the thing is, I think it's important to realize that nothing within the universe has the capacity or the ability to measure or test or maybe even detect that which is without the universe.
Yeah.
Without like outside the universe, essentially. Essentially, I mean, for one, physically, we can't reach the end. And if it's expanding from a singular point, we can't go backwards through time.
Yeah.
We can't punch through space. We can't really manipulate any of that kind of stuff.
Right.
And then if inherently it's like you said, it's metaphysical. It's beyond our universe. And so how do you use internal logic and systems to detect and or measure things that created those things, right? Or something like that.
You couldn't detect them, but you can say this. There is no case in which our experience would ever contradict the idea that something has to do something. Like a nothing never does something.
But
that is outside of our
what
experience.
if, since we're talking about before the universe formed, time and space and laws had no applicability because the things in which they act don't exist, is it plausible that in a non-universe, a different universe than ours, things can randomly occur with no cause? Is it possible that there exists a universe where things can occur with no cause?
Some people might go to quantum mechanics and say, we can show that things happen without a cause. But I think that really just comes down to the unpredictability of the outcome of there's probability involved at the quantum level. It's not that there is no cause. It's just that the probability of something happening is within a range of possible. Like if you're going to predict where an electron is going to be, there's a probable range of where it's going to be.
Right.
You're not going to know exactly.
And then when you measure it, all sorts of things happen.
Right.
So
Well, and there's argument about whether that's. But the key, my fundamental thought is simply this. If it is true that things happen from nothing, then everything we know about science fundamentally breaks down.
yeah, because you can't rely on cause and effect anymore.
Right. Yeah, I mean, everything goes out the window.
Because you could just be like, oh, that just happened.
Right.
And again, the closest that scientists have tried to get to the concept of nothing, I often use this exercise with people. I say, close your eyes and think about nothing. It's possible.
That's still something.
The only prism we have, we usually picture like this blackness, but blackness is something. The emptiness of space is something. So you really can't grasp the concept of nothing because the only prism we have to filter it through is the prism of something because we are something. We exist in something. So the closest they've got to try to do it is the quantum vacuum. Again, Lawrence Krauss, the astrophysicist or theoretical physicist at ASU, has been the biggest proponent of this argument. But quantum vacuum, in which particles can supposedly spontaneously come into existence and out of existence, is really a faulty definition of nothing because there's the forces at work within the vacuum that can produce these particles. And there's also, it doesn't solve the problem of the origin of information. There's information contained within those particles within that force. So where does the information come from? You have the problem of the existence of material, but you also have the problem of the origin of information. So this outline, our show outline today, has writing on it. This isn't the source of the information. It's a medium that displays the information, but the information originated in my mind. At least I think it did. So information only comes from mind. It only comes from a person personal cause to convey that information.
Well, okay, so if you're thinking about it from the perspective of the Big Bang, is it still the common theory, hypothesis, anyway, that all of the matter that is in the universe was contained in a singular point at some point in time, like a hot, dense, singular point, and then from that singular point
Well, it's
came.
like an infinitely small.
So where is that going? For one, okay, how do you condense everything that small? For one, I don't know.
I don't know that we fully know.
That doesn't make sense. But also all the information as well. Where did that come from?
Theoretical physicist out there wants to call in. We appreciate it.
That's how I've heard it explained before. Is that like before the Big Bang, everything was just like an infinitely small, dense something that was nothing. I don't see that doesn't make sense. From nothing came an infinitely expanding, but like everything was condensed into that. I don't know.
Yeah, that's why I said it's to me it leads to what I would consider.
There's lots of different theories, like the bubble, like the membranes. There's like
to say that nothing.
It came from another dimension, basically. Like, and we have like different membranes.
All we have to say, I think, really is just the idea that there is a something.
Yeah.
It seems more reasonable than saying there is a nothing, because that leads to irrationality.
Well, and I think people will go to the default of, oh, well, you guys are religious, and of course you're just trying to prove God's existence. And I would say that's not a religious argument. You don't have to be religious to recognize that there is, it's more likely than not, there is a mind that is the source of the universe, that is the source of the information that helps to govern the universe, the laws of physics, the laws of the whole universe. That's much more rational than not. So then, I like to call it the concentric circles of belief. So, okay, if you posit that it's more rational than not, then what's the best explanation for that mind? So, the idea that there is intelligence behind the universe, that it is designed, is not in and of itself a religious argument. Now, it may have implications to a religion or a particular worldview. If you suppose that there is something beyond this universe, you're opening yourself up to the possibility that the universe is not closed. You're opening yourself up to the possibility that that something, someone or something beyond the universe may have,
Well, I think there's a jump though that you just did, and that is the jump from something to that something being a mind or a person. I think that's a jump.
It is a jump. I would say it's a logical
I
jump.
think to me the most basic thing is if the universe had a beginning, that whatever caused the universe to come into being is itself a something.
Yeah.
I think the then jump into talking about person or mind is another, and I still think we're in metaphysical realm there, where we're gonna have to talk about what are some possibilities of what that something could
Can
be.
you get from something to person based on like reason alone, or do you have to rely on something like special revelation?
Well, I think you can get to the concept of broad. By person, you mean mind. You mean intelligence. I think that's a reasonable jump because again, you have the probably origin of information. We haven't seen an example in which information comes from something other than mind. Then thinking creature of some capacity with some ability to reflect upon
I think we'd have to define
with volitions.
information. Because a particle that like a quark that pops into observable existence carries with it movement and position information that we can detect.
It's a medium that carries that information. Again, the information didn't originate with quark. The information that the parts that make up the quark didn't originate with it.
I see what you're saying.
The information on this page didn't originate there. It's a medium that conveys it. So I would say the information for the quark didn't come from the quark that popped into existence.
Yeah.
I see.
So
Yeah.
I said the word quark too many times.
So let's explore. Let's do some thought experiments to help maybe people listening think through some of these things for themselves. You could say something like, I believe this is one of the arguments put forth by one of the philosophers in the 1800s, whose name is escaping me right now.
Descartes?
No. He actually
Maybe just
wrote
talk
an
about it and we'll figure it
argument
out.
against miracles. Why Hume?
Oh, Hume. Yeah.
David Hume. Yeah. And you could say something like this: maybe the universe is something like a plant, and the plant itself just keeps dropping seeds, and then a new plant grows, and so why couldn't you say the universe itself is something more akin to a plant than something else? And so that would be a thought process that you'd have to go through, because again, if you concede that there's a something rather than a nothing, because if you had nothing, I don't know how nothing does anything.
Something's much more logical.
Something seems more rational. Seems, yeah, could be wrong, but that seems to be the case. I don't know any other way to think about it without
It is pouring rain out there all
totally
of a sudden.
throwing down
Yeah, it
everything.
is.
I immediately
Okay,
regret my
no
choice
rabbit
of
trails.
language. Sorry.
So if we were to say that, then we have to go through the idea of, okay, a plant. We know about plants, right? Because we're using an analogy. This is all we can do. We can use analogies based on what we know in the universe, because that's all we're limited to. Yeah, so a plant. At some point in time, though, a plant had a beginning, right?
Yes.
So if a plant, this is where I would maybe say I disagree with David Hume, Mr. Hume, is
You
a
hate
plant
philosophy.
is a kind of thing if it is like the universe, which itself also must have a beginning. And so it doesn't get you out. So if there's a plant-like thing that's just dropping universes into existence.
You're talking about the universe-making machine.
Yeah,
thought
universe-making
experiment,
machine, but
basically.
he argued it in the form of a plant.
No, that makes sense. But that's
Yeah.
It's been
easy.
recontextualized.
Right.
The information again contained
You are
within the plant
only
had to come from
moving the problem back. If that plant is anything like what we know a plant to be, and everything that we know comes from what we know inside the universe, right? It could be that there's outside of the universe nothing makes sense and everything's irrational, but that doesn't seem to be the case. But if it is, then why are we even talking about it? Because it wouldn't matter. But the key is, if you move to that place, then the plant itself is a thing in which we know must also have a beginning. And if the universe is like the plant, then the universe must also have a beginning, and whatever made the universe, right, if it's like a plant, would also have to have a beginning. You've only moved the problem back.
So I think yes, and that makes it the logical argument. I think like that you can come at it from both sides, and you can essentially be like, I think that you're not completely irrational to form a belief that because there is something that had to have come from something, and I believe that something to be a person that has a mind and a will, and I will call that God. And then God created and brought all this somethings into existence, and I want to know who that God is.
Right.
I think you could also come from the other side and say that outside of our universe, prior to there being a universe, the laws in which we think, like cause and effect, do not apply. And so there could have very well been a time at which there was no such thing as a thing, and then spontaneously things came into existence, because while it contradicts cause and effect in our universe, it wouldn't contradict cause and effect in a universe where cause and effect does not exist. And so when you get, it's still a metaphysical claim.
What would
it's
a
still,
universe look like which has no cause and effect?
could it even exist? I don't know. But I don't.
You filter it through the prism of a universe.
But I'm not
that
talking
doesn't
about
have
it.
a
I mean,
paradigm to even speak.
I'm not
I'm
saying
not
you're wrong.
even-
I'm just
no.
asking the question.
Right.
How would that even look?
I
What
wouldn't.
would that
I wouldn't
look
even
like?
call it necessarily a universe. I would just say the outside of the universe. So we have an orderly constructed. No, we have an orderly formed universe right now. We have cause and effect and laws and things obey physics, etc. There could be outside of that. This could be a bubble, and outside of that, nothing. It's free game. There's nothing, and there's some things. There's spontaneous creations of other universes and stuff like that.
So I mean, we could follow.
But
that.
you could go.
There's definitely
from different
a
directions.
prism in which you could follow that. You could follow that down and just say, okay.
This is something that I've just been thinking through
Yeah.
recently. It's not
Yeah.
like I haven't
No,
actually
no,
gone
You're good.
in depth on this, because to me that would actually be. So when an atheist comes out and says, well, okay, so where did the something come from? I don't think that's just, like we've already said, that's just pushing the same question back. What I'm trying to say is that maybe there is a reality existent outside of our present reality in which nothing and somethings, and there's spontaneous creation and information comes out of nowhere. Like, I don't know, black holes. What's on the other end of a black hole? Maybe that's where universes come from. All that information gets trapped, and then it's, I don't know. What I'm saying is that actually gives you a logical place to go to solve the issue of where something came from out of nothing, rather than what created God. Right. So
if we did go there, I mean, let's do a mind thing. So let's say that outside of the universe, there's just a thought experiment maybe is a better word. Let's say there is thought experiment is a better word. Let's say there is a whole slew of things that just don't make any sense. Why should we presuppose that whatever is outside the universe is radically and totally different than the things that we find inside the universe? And so if your claim is that the outside, and I'm not saying you're wrong, I'm just saying think through it. This is what we're doing. If your claim is that something outside of the universe is totally radically different than everything we know inside the universe, what would you offer for me to say that is a worthwhile thing to believe in, rather than saying the thing outside of the universe is in fact some way resembling the kinds of things we find in the universe, intelligible, ordered, has particular ways that make things understood.
Certain set of laws and principles.
Well,
Or
and
just that it's understandable, because if we say that whatever's outside of the universe is like totally out of comprehension, it just unicorns are popping in and out of existence, farting rainbows everywhere. I mean, that's what it is.
I smell a hit TV show.
What possible? What
have you
what
guys seen Rick and Morty?
They have unicorn farting rainbows, or rainbow farting unicorns.
Rainbow
That's hard
farting
to say.
unicorns are outside of the universe.
like,
I
just
love that
popping
band.
universes, squatty potties are popping
We are
universes
rainbow farting
into existence.
unicorns on stage.
What-
Listen to them.
But do you see where I'm going?
Yeah,
Just
no, I get your question.
What possible how would you make an argument that would lead me to believe that? Because the whole purpose of believing something is true is partly based on its validity as a good, thoughtful, right? Like the reason applies.
Right.
Like evidence applies. But then you remove all that and say, well, that could be it. Now I'm going to ask you, based on the laws inside of the universe, why would it be more likely? And you're going to have to use reason. And so there's this conundrum you get into anytime you exhort to, well, the universe could just be something we don't know. But why?
Right.
And then we're going to have to use reason to sort of argue into an absurdity that is. Do you see what I'm saying? Like you kind of run into a wall where you're like, you can't go any further. You'd have to state it a priori without experience and just say, well, that's what I believe is true.
We've already covered that, though, that we can't use the
So we can't use science in the strict sense of like testing something, falsify. Like
we can't falsify metaphysical claims.
Right, but
so
we
they're
can
metaphysical.
use other means.
But
to
can we?
explore
So is it rational to conclude that because this reason exists within our mind, one singular species in this vast universe, we have the ability to reason the way that we do? Is it rational to assume that that line of reasoning works all the way back to before the universe began? And so,
prime reality, as it's been called.
is it reasonable to assume that our reason is capable of describing nothing or describing an existence beyond our universe? So at that point, I would say suspend reason and then go from there. And at that point, I feel like you lose people, because if it's not reasonable, I won't even consider it. But it's like, that's an unreasonable, to get to anything metaphysical, I think you have to suspend the ability to be able to comprehend it completely. And that's not like an argument for God. That's an argument for anything beyond our known reality.
To a certain extent, all I would push back on is just saying this. It seems like when we look at something in a mirror, we're seeing something's reflection, right?
Right.
It like in Hume's case, he says, there's this plant-bearing thing that makes universes. Well, that means they resemble one another. I would ask the question, is it more likely or less likely that the thing that made the universe would somehow
that it
be
created.
in some kind of resemblance
To me, that
like
makes sense.
the universe, rather than just, you could say, well, we just don't know, and it's unicorns pooping rainbows everywhere. All that stuff would apply, and I would say I can't disprove it.
There's an old saying that.
But what makes more sense?
Yeah, there's an old saying that you can't divorce a work of art from the artist. That in some capacity, some element of what made that artist, whether it's a drawing, whether it's a book, whether it's a movie, whatever, there's some element of whatever makes that artist, whatever makes Richard, when he produces some form of art that again conveys information, there will be something of him in that. It will have some connection to who he is, what he values, what he expresses in himself. So it is logical to conclude conclude that back to whatever the prime reality outside the universe is, that the universe is in some way a reflection of what makes that prime reality that prime reality.
Or is the prime reality intrinsic to the very nature of what reality is?
I don't
Such
know.
as reason, regardless of whether there was a universe, would still apply in the same way mathematics would.
Yeah. Well,
See, prime reality goes all the way through. I don't
It
think it would
does.
get cut off.
Once heard it stated by one of our agnostic students. He said, "If you can give me one free miracle, I can give you the rest," which I think was very honest of him to say that I can't come to one conclusion or another way God exists, but if you can give me that one free miracle of creation.
This is actually a really good point. So Daniel, going back to the thought experiment, which I think is really interesting, because it could be that. I can't disprove it. I can't say that's wrong. I don't necessarily think that's true, but if the universe comes into being with no laws of physics, then by definition, whatever made the universe is itself supernatural, right? It's by definition, because it's supra,
Right.
it's more than natural. So, the Big Bang in my eyes is a
Supernatural.
supernatural event. Regardless of, even if you say it's not God, it's a unicorn.
It's something that does not normally happen. There is nothing within the universe that explains why the universe is here. There is nothing within the normal
Right.
realms of physics that could possibly explain
Because
why
all
there's
those
universe
things
rather than
broke down.
nothing. Yes.
And so,
You have to suppose that one free miracle.
well, it's not just a free miracle, but by definition,
One supernatural event.
It's a supernatural event
Because it's not occurring within our known universe,
Exactly.
correct.
as we can tell.
And I would say you actually need more. You need the miracle of the creation of space-time. You need the miracle of the creation of life from non-life, prebiotic evolution.
Well,
you actually need a lot of
that's-
miracles.
On the current model, billions of years after the Big Bang.
But I'm saying there's still something that
Well, yeah.
that's still something that you cannot explain through natural scientific process today. Some hold out
What you can't explain?
the origin of prebiotic evolution. That some people will claim that we've solved the problem.
That's a
of the
whole.
origin of
Let's.
life.
I mean,
let's
that's a different
that's-
universe.
I know.
That's a huge,
That's a
totally
huge- that's
different
a
discussion.
Billions and billions of year jump. I get it, but I'm just saying, you actually have more than just one free miracle. That's what I'm saying. So, we'll tie this all together in a couple minutes here. But for the axiological question would be, okay, why bother knowing? What value is it to me to contemplate why there is something rather than nothing? To contemplate the prime reality of the universe, or should we just be hedonists and say, I'm not going to contemplate this. I'm just going to think and believe and do whatever brings me the most amount of pleasure I can possibly have before my consciousness.
Wow. Okay. Like
goes
we're. I don't know if any of those. I think
I'd say, what's this topic? Why bother? Why does it matter? Why is it of value to know, or just say
because everyone wants to know, why do we want to go to Mars?
some
Why does
people
Elon Musk want to
Some
build huge
people want to
rockets?
sit around,
'Cause
get
it's
high, and
cool.
watch their favorite YouTube shows, and that's all that matters.
Everybody-
The grand meaning of things
You know what
doesn't
we
matter to
need?
them.
What?
We need marijuana on this show.
No.
Yes.
No, we do not. No, we do
If
not.
Elon Musk can do
Joe Rogan, the Joe. No.
I think it's important to just contemplate based on the matter
I'm
of
not
Stack of
sure.
muffins and
purpose.
Everybody's staring off into
motive.
space, eating lots of food. That sounds.
But why is there a universe?
The why has always
I feel like
been there.
philosophers were already high.
No. I mean, that's why I started with the Greeks. Everybody has been intrigued with this question, and everybody's interested to know what's actually true.
Yeah, I mean, some people actually contemplate on the reality of truth. Some people, I think, they go about and they presume that truth, it just is, the universe is, and I'm just going to do again what makes me happy, what brings me pleasure in this time.
Well, I mean, at some level, you kind of have to survive. You can't sit. One of the interesting things is that you only usually start thinking about these things the further along you get in, moving away from your basic needs being met.
Yeah, like we talked about last week, we have the luxury in 21st century America, for the most part, of being
I mean,
able to.
if you're a
Hierarchy.
hunter-gatherer and you're constantly being hunted, I don't know that you're sitting around. being
Hierarchy
like-
of needs.
Hierarchy of needs, yeah. I don't know if you're
in the grand scheme of things,
Pavlov's.
should I kill this mastodon and preserve meat for my family? Think about the ethical and
Or
philosophical
did he even
implications of
think
it.
about it like that?
He just-
Maybe he didn't have the
I don't-
words.
Hit mastodon with a club, eat meat.
I think that's how it works. You kill the thing and you eat it because that's what will happen to me if I don't.
And you feel
I don't know.
good because you put something in your stomach and it gives you sensory pleasure.
I think think thinking about the origin of the universe ultimately comes down to thinking about why are we here, what purpose do we serve, and what
Right.
should we do with that
And
purpose.
if there is no purpose,
Then why does anything matter? We just created ourselves.
Well, that's why
I
I
don't know.
appreciate the honesty of naturalists like Nietzsche, and even before him, Marquis de Sade, as weird as that is, quoting somebody, this sexual sadist, the man that sadist was literally named after. But at least he was honest. He said, look, there's no purpose, there's no great meaning to anything except as much sexual pleasure as you can possibly obtain. So go do it. If it feels good, do it without any thought because there's no great meaning to anything.
Yeah, but that gets boring. So
well, that would be his.
But that's his value.
what happens when your purpose in life
There might be
gets
more
boring?
people who, if there weren't consequences, would agree with that. We're getting into like super complicated social issues here. We got to stay on topic here.
But it all goes down to the foundation issue. If you believe there is a mind, there is a purpose behind the universe, that begs the question of then what are we to do in light of that purpose? I would say
Sure.
that. If you believe there is no purpose whatsoever behind the universe, it's hard to make a rational argument for why you shouldn't, go out.
But
free real
there's,
estate.
There's some. Yeah,
All right, maybe we can table that
it
one
gets
for next week,
really
what they
complicated
should
when you're
do.
trying. So
How then now shall we live?
well, that's a good question. But I think there's people like Thomas Jefferson who are deists who thought that God bam got the universe going, and then he was
Set
like,
the
I'm
clock in motion
taking a
and set
nap.
the way, yeah.
However you guys decide to do things, there are lots of possible choices to how you understand those things.
Do you think he ever was like a proponent of manifest deity?
Manifest destiny, you mean?
Yeah, sorry.
Yeah,
Manifest
Okay.
destiny.
It's the same basic thing.
Well, that
I
would
was-
imply that God actually had a will. That would kind of go against.
Well,
his
that's what because I don't know if he did, and that would be something I would have looked into. But that was a pretty big thing in the expansion in America and all that kind of the manifest destiny. That like this is our God-given right, which is interesting because that might be contradictory to the fundamental beliefs of
But
the
God
founding
cares
fathers.
about what the American nation does with its land.
Yeah, I don't know. That's another thing altogether.
All right, we're an hour and 20 in.
We should wrap it up.
Probably park this plane.
Well, anyway, I hope you guys were intrigued, and I hope that you got some different thoughts out of this. And like I said, we're not the first to talk about this. We will not be the last. Hopefully we took some steps to get to the point. And I really hope that maybe even a better picture to really say this, why I think this is right, is a lot of times, even in my life where I've struggled with believing in things, the thing I've always come back to realize is this: whatever we're claiming about metaphysics, science can't ultimately go there, like the hard sciences. So if we're standing on a cliff and we're all pointing out there saying, well, we know this is there, we're speaking a little bit in ignorance. And so there's other tools we have to use to go to try to get there.
Beyond
It's not just the hard sciences, because hard sciences only get you so far.
Think about this. Kurt Gödel basically proved that any system that is complex enough to have arithmetic within it cannot inherently prove itself to be true. So how could you then use the universe to inherently prove that the universe itself is true? So think about that. We have
Well,
to
it'd be
use we have to use a
It's
combination
circular
of
logic.
mathematics and science and biology, like all these things work together for us to conclude that okay, by using mathematics we can assume that this physical principle is true, and all these kinds of things. We can prove these other things, and I think that what you're getting at is that we can use different tools to get to truth, and that it's like not just one. It's not just science. It's not just religion.
Right, but
it's not
the
just
hard
philosophy.
sciences kind of truth where you can falsify it, and if someone says God exists, someone says he doesn't. How do you falsify?
One interesting thing that I just on those lines, one interesting thing that I discovered in my time on university campuses is that there's a greater percentage of theists, or at least deists, in the hard sciences than the soft sciences, people who identify as such. Because I think for that reason, in the hard sciences you deal, supposedly at least, theoretically, with black and white facts. Does 2 + 2 = 4? Yes. So it's either a yes or a no, rather than everything being somewhat subjective and ultimately a product of what you choose to value in the soft sciences. So that was an interesting observation. You might think of it the opposite, but in actuality, those in the hard sciences say, look, this is where the evidence points. So this is what I'm going to believe, regardless of whether I value it or not, regardless of whether it has bearing on my life. Antony Flew, the English philosopher, is a great example of this. When he, at age 80 in 2003, after spending his whole life defending atheism and attacking religion, came out and conceded that he no longer considered atheism valid. He never came to the point of theism. He called himself a deist, but it said it is not logical or possible to believe that the universe came about from nothing. And he pointed to one of the significant factors in that was the rise of the study of the human genome. And we've seen many, many advancements in this over the last several decades, especially Stephen Meyer in his book Signature in the Cell talks about this, about the amount of information contained within the human cell and within DNA. And he pointed to it simply and said, look, I can't, as a rational thinking person, believe that this came from nothing. This amount of information indicates intelligence behind it. Now, he, again, didn't necessarily posit exactly what that intelligence is, but he said it's more likely than not that there was a mind behind it. And he, to quote the great Socrates, just said, I'm going to go where the evidence leads. So,
I think, I think it's just these types of things give us the ability to think about what we want to do with the information, and then what we can contribute to the world, and what we can glean from it, essentially.
So in light of this question, I have one final question, but in light of the presupposition that the universe has meaning, there's purpose behind everything, what should I get for lunch today? Supposing that there is a...
That's way too deep of a question.
How about you argue from the...
I'm seriously, like, I'm hungry, I haven't eaten lunch, been waiting, I got a good workout in this morning, I burned a lot of calories, now I need to put them back in my body. I have options. Restaurants are open again today. This is the axiological question of what should I value? Should I value delicious Chinese? Should I value a hearty sandwich? Should I value...
Anyway, thanks for joining us, everybody. We appreciate you.
Seriously,
The train's derailed.
I wonder what I should do. All right. So want to sign us off?
Yeah, I'd just say,
Guy.
you know, wherever you're at in this whole thing, I would really dig into some of the information and look at some of the stuff we've talked about. And yeah, I hope you enjoyed discussing this, and we're going to continue to try to discuss issues, try to be fair-sided. We're going to try to get some people on also who probably disagree with us and can provide an alternate perspective, because we really do want to have dialogue back and forth.
And if
and
you
try
want
to
to come on and
understand
tell
issues.
us how dumb you think we are, we'd love
No,
to
actually, we
share.
don't want people to just tell people that they're dumb, because that's not beneficial to moving the discussion along.
Well, that's dumb.
What?
What?
That's dumb.
Okay, anyway.
If you want to come start drama, hit me up.
Yeah.
What he said.
All right.
All right.
Thank you for watching, and we will be back same time, same place next week. Have a great day.
Maybe.
What? Oh.